And basically what it's about is how to get all the flavor out of your herbs and spices and things like that, right? And we do that by basically, the big secret here, it ain't complicated, we do it by sweating, okay? When we're sweating things like vegetables, that's when I'm working spices into a recipe. So let me break it on down, right? You think about, if you've seen Godfather, they talk about how to make some sauce. This is Godfather 1, how to make tomato sauce, right? And you chop a little garlic and you chop a little onion, not too much onion. Yeah, I know, I just used 2 small ones. You guys might be familiar with the scenes, right? So what you're doing is you're starting with a little olive oil or maybe some bacon fat or something like that, right? You add a little bit of garlic in there and you want it at kind of a low temp. You want that garlic flavor to get into that fat. You're basically transferring the flavor from the garlic into that fat. And the next thing you do is you'll add some onion in there. And this is where the sweating really starts happening. We might turn up our heat because now we got all this cold onion in there and it's all wet. So I can get a little more heat on that thing. And we kind of sweat that out. While the onions and garlic are kind of in the pan, the onions are kind of flavoring that fat, that garlic flavored fat now, right? And this is where I start working in my spices. For Italian, you know, I might work in a little bit of fennel seed and I might have some dried basil and dried oregano and things like that. I know fresh herbs are wonderful and everything, but I don't use them in the beginning of a dish. I use them at the end of a dish to finish, right? So I use my dried herbs and spices in the beginning. I'll throw a bay leaf in there too, right? And as those onions are cooking out, the flavors of the spices are releasing into the fat. Here's a little secret: the flavors in the spices are all oils too, right? They're oil based. You ever throw cinnamon on top of cold water? It'll just sit there. If I put it on the fire, the oils kind of and start warming it up, that water's going to start, you know, the oil's going to start leaching out, and the cinnamon's going to disperse into that hot water. Now we got to heat those spices. That's how we get the flavor out of them, right? And by the way, you never want to add spices at the end of something. Your guest is going to get mouthfuls of powder on their palate. You have to cook spices, and it all happens as you're sweating things out. We're going to kind of demo this in a little bit, right? And so basically the idea here, you've all heard that idea that fat is flavor. I always say it a little bit differently. I did this in another happy hour. Fat is a vehicle for flavor. I took the flavor out of the garlic, put it into the olive oil, right? I took the flavor of the onions and infused it into that olive oil, and now the olive oil tastes like garlic and onion. And then I did the herbs and spices. Now the oil tastes like herbs and spices and garlic and onion and all of that stuff. Fat is carrying that flavor to the dish. I always say fat's a vehicle for flavor, right? And so that's kind of what sweating is all about. That idea of just flavoring the fat, and then that fat carries those flavors into your dish. Okay. Let me check my winter squash here. I'm just kind of I got a lot of balls in the air here. I got to keep checking. Sorry guys, it kind of messes with the flow, but it kind of is what it is. I don't have a staff working with me. So I've pulled out my summer squash. You can see I'm picking up a little bit of color around the edges. I had a little water on that tray and that water all evaporated away. Hey, that's a-okay. I don't need the water for the whole thing, but I just didn't want it dry the whole time, right? That gives us a little kind of an insurance policy on this summer squash so it doesn't get too dark, right? So I'm poking my summer squash. Gosh, it's getting pretty soft here. My knife's going in. I'm still feeling a little resistance. It's almost like I'm, it's almost like I'm sticking it into watermelon, okay? Like the flesh of watermelon. It's just a little resistance, but it's super close. I want it to feel like I'm poking a hot knife into butter. It just goes right in and out, okay? So I'm gonna go back in for a little while here. I'm not gonna add water. It's doing fine. It's doing fine. I'm not worried. I'm gonna also check these quinoa again because they cook up really, really quickly. Glenn, good to see you. Esdine, good to see you. Hope I'm saying that right. And my grains, hard to see, but my grains, gosh, trying to get an angle on this. That's tricky. Here we go. It's really, really difficult for you guys to see that, I can tell. But let's see, I will just look at them, and I am still not seeing that little tail hanging off of my quinoa. So back in it goes, and it's just over here simmering, okay? Again, boiling method for grains. If this was pasta, we'd, just give it a little stir every once in a while. There's really not much difference between cooking this or cooking cream of wheat or cooking pasta. It all falls under the boiling method of grains or grain products, okay? All right, so we were just talking about how to get flavors into food. let me back up into beans, right? Oftentimes when I'm cooking in a restaurant, you know, I need to get my beans on the fire super, super fast. If I'm making like a lentil chili, which is what I'm going to kind of make tonight. I'm going to go Latin style on this, okay? If I'm making a lentil chili, I don't want to start creating the flavors and then add my lentils to it and then start cooking it or whatever. I usually want to get my beans or my lentils on the fire because it's a long cooking time, and then I can start making my flavoring compounds, doing all that sweating and the spices and all that stuff on the side, and then I just add my lentils into it, and boom, it's all together again. This is how I handle my neutral beans that I cook on Sunday and I want to eat all week. Hey, I'll just sweat off a few herbs and spices and some oil and garlic and onions and things like that, and then I just toss my beans in with them, and boom, I got the flavor I'm looking for, right? This is how I cook everything. This is how every one pot dish in the world starts, right? But I kind of call that idea of just kind of getting the pots on the the beans on the fire first, and then worrying about the flavors. I call that a jump start. Just get your beans cooking, jump start them. You can worry about your flavors later, and that's exactly what you're seeing me do today, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna move a pot to the back, okay? On my crappy little stove. I only have 3 burners on this stove. One of them's totally busted. I gotta get a new stove. After the quarantine, I'll get a new stove. Okay, so I moved that back, and I'm going to start sweating out some spices here to make kind of a you know, Southwestern, Latin, whatever you want to call it, maybe a chili sort of a lentil thing here, okay? And so I'm going vegetarian today. I'm not using any animal products, so I'm just going to use the same oil that I was using before. It's my little grapeseed oil that I'm using. Neutral flavor, takes a good high heat. Hey, it works in a lot of applications for me here. So I'm putting in a goodly amount of fat here, of oil, okay? Oil, fat is flavor, right? And happy hour, everybody. Let's do one of these. Ah, delicious, delicious. So I put a good amount of oil in there, and I don't want a high heat here. I've got it on just warm, okay? On the spinal tap scale, I'm on about 2 out of 11 here, okay? It's really, really low flame. Next, I'm gonna get some garlic going, okay? This is just like the tomato sauce from Goodfellas, okay? I'm using some garlic here. I'm probably gonna do about 3 cloves. And by the way, I'm not just doing lentils here. I'm gonna do both of my beans together for dinner tonight. I'm doing kind of a combination of beans. Why not? Important note, that I'm cooking them separately because, of course, they have separate cooking times, a lentil versus a bean. So I cut off the bottoms of my garlic. I give them a little crack. These are already kind of cracked. This one's not. Just with the side of my knife. Let me adjust camera here. Sorry, guys. Still getting used to this part of it. Nope. Yeah, I think you can see that. So I just kind of crack with the garlic clove with the side of my knife. I don't want to completely smash this thing. And then I roll it in my hand and the peels just roll right off. I always talk about those little rubber garlic tubes that you buy. You don't need those. Just roll it in your hand. I don't know what those garlic tubes are even for. I'm going to get rid of all of that garlic peel, or paper as I call it. Get rid of the paper. I don't want a single speck of that stuff. It drives me crazy having garlic peel or onion peel in my prep. And then what I'm going to do is, I think I'll slice this like they did in Casino. Goodfellas, I can't remember what movie. Goodfellas, that was it. So I'm going really, really thin slices here. I got my knife. I'm holding the blade here. I want to kind of point that out. My other fingers are really not doing much. And this other hand, I got my fingertips curled under into what we call the claw. And I'm making a really, really tiny claw here. And I'm just going really, really quickly, just slicing this stuff up. And you'll see little slices of garlic in the finished product. So I'm doing 3 cloves here. That's a good amount of garlic. I'm watching my quinoa. I think my quinoa is actually done. And if you get your hand position right here, you can watch your pots while you're slicing. Excuse me. Suzanne, welcome. Who else is there? Maiden, thanks for coming. Okay, my oil is on a low heat here. And I'm just going to toss my garlic in there. And it's not going to fry or sizzle or anything. It's just going to kind of gently infuse. I might turn my heat up to 4 on a scale of 4 to 11, or a scale of 1 to 11. Let me stand this up again. So I'm going to turn this up a little. And what I'm looking for is the aroma of the garlic. You've probably heard this before on like Food Network. If you ever watch Food TV or any of that stuff, you know, once you smell the garlic, then you start going in with your other ingredients. I'm going to start cutting up an onion now, okay? And by the way, unlike Food Network, I don't just cut everything up ahead of time, right? You know, if you're a cook, you're not just cutting everything up and then starting to cook. You're wasting time that way, right? I'll cut one thing, and then while that's kind of cooking, I'm cutting my next thing. And while that's cooking, I cut my next thing. I call it feed the kitty, just continually just laying stuff in that pan. Now the garlic's starting to sizzle a little bit in there, and I'm just gonna set that aside. I pulled it off the fire while I cut my onion. Usually in the kitchen, I'm not talking so much, right? And I gotta check my quinoa. Yes, quinoa's done. I'm gonna pull that quinoa off. I'm going to work a tiny bit of salt into it, just like my beans earlier. I need a little towel. I'm going to work a little salt in, and I'm going to let that cool off. So I'm going to set it off on the side, and it'll just kind of hang out over there. Okay, back to my, again, I'm kind of making lentil chili out of this, or bean chili out of this. No meat chili. So I'm going to break up an onion now. Yeah, hopefully you can see that. I'm going to take off the North Pole and the South Pole first. I felt like my knife needed a little one of these. Do one of those. Whenever you steal your knife, you want to wipe that blade. And now I'll cut down through the onion. And I don't need a whole onion for this dish. I'm going to kick half of that aside. And we're going to peel this onion. I usually use my knife to grab the edge, the corner. Once you cut this in half, it's easy to grab a corner of this and pull it off. Hey, Bradley Miller, good to see you. Suzanne Burns in the house. Good to see you, folks. Thanks for dropping by to Quarantine Kitchen Happy Hour. Hope you guys are picking up some cooking technique here, guys. People pay money for this. They actually pay me money to do this. I can't believe it. It's crazy. It's crazy. I'm going to do one of those Cicely onions like you see on Food Network all the time. They do those horizontal cuts to it. I'm not cutting all the way through. This is just how we do a rough diced onion for making something like chili or tomato sauce or something like that. It doesn't have to be perfect little pieces because it's going to cook down almost to nothing in your pot. So I went horizontal cuts, then I went across the top, and now I'm going to turn that onion, I'm going to go across the face now. And this isn't a knife skills class, I just kind of throw this stuff at you as I go. One of these days I'll do an actual knife skills class for you guys and show you how this really works in a little more depth. By the way, that's the root end of my onion. I'm going to hang on to that guy. It's going in a stock pot. Never throw anything away. Don't throw flavor away. My crew always called that the Dave Nelson doctrine. Do not throw flavor away. I had a lot of doctrine back in the day. All right. So it's that easy. That onion got cut up pretty quickly. Let's go back to my pot where I was just kind of infusing a little garlic into the oil. This is all about flavoring the oil again. And now I'm going to go ahead and add onion. Once I add the onion, I can kick up that heat. I even talked about this a little bit. That onion's wet and it's cold and it just cooled my pan off. And I need to get it back up to 10. Wiping down, a little OCD. You want to be a little OCD in the kitchen, people. Let's see who else is out there. Oh, still looking at Bradley. Good to see you all. I'm turning this up to about 8 out of 10 now. I might turn that down slightly more.